everybody here okay? Because we don't really have an intercom system set up, but I know Stephen Fay is quite good at projecting his voice, and I used to be. Just to let you know, after this event, there's going to be a police car, the motorcycles, and then a cavalcade of cars can follow them. Can you hear? Anyway, after the event, you can follow the cars down to the town offices. There are maps if you want them. They're going to ring the USS Bennington bell at 1 o'clock. And there'll be a ceremony at the town offices. So I hope everybody can get down there also. And then come back here if you haven't been in the monument yet. It's good to know that our elevator is running. It's in prime good shape. It's as good as it can get, so feel secure to come up and ride the elevator.
There's very handsome operators there too.
Yes. At exactly 12 o'clock, Vintage Visitors will be presenting Phyllis Chapman and Mike Chapman, better known as Stephen Fay, from the Fay Tavern down the road. And they'll be reading the Declaration of Independence. It'll be finished at 1. But again, thank you all for being here. We do have copies of the Declaration of Independence. And for those who want to broaden their view, there is Frederick Douglass's speech about July 4th. We have copies of that, which is kind of interesting for a different point of view. So.
Mary Lou. Waters.
Oh, yes.
Donation box.
Yep, there's water over by the donation box. Help yourself if you're thirsty. There are flags, 3 flags. Everybody should have a flag. If there's not enough outside, we have some more inside. These are all compliments of the state of Vermont. Woo! Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over. Are you ready yet?
I see Stephen Fay strolling over.
He's coming right over.
Yep, I think he's got something to say. But sure, I will start whenever you're ready.
Yeah. I'm not as loud as I used to be.
Just channel your inner youth.
Okay, let's turn it over to Stephen Fay and, is this Mrs. Fay by
Mrs.
chance?
Fay will
Mrs.
do,
Fay.
Yes. Well, good afternoon to everyone, and it's so delightful to see you all here. It is so wonderful to have such a crowd, and we have one every year, to hear about one of the most important documents that's ever been written and published on American soil. And prior to having my beloved husband here, Stephen Fay, also known as Mike Chapman, read the actual declaration to you, I would just like to make a couple of remarks about the holiday of July 4th and its origin. Now, there have been people, John Adams, for one, that actually believed that July 2nd should have been Independence Day, not July 4th. And I will explain that in a little bit further detail after I read to you something that Mrs. Adams wrote to her husband before July 4th, and give you a perspective from the colonial woman's standpoint. She writes to John Adams on March 31st, 1776. This is well before the Declaration has been written. She says, "I have sometimes been ready to think that the passion for liberty cannot be equally strong in the breasts of those who have been accustomed to deprive their fellow creatures of theirs. Of this, I am certain that it is not founded upon that generous and Christian principle of doing to others as we would others do to us. I long to hear that you have declared an independency, and by way in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies. And be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. Now, here's some remarks that John Adams wrote to her about the independence and what he could see coming. He says, "Time has been given for the whole people, maturely, to consider the great question of independence and to ripen their judgments, dissipate their fears, and allure their hopes by discussing it in newspapers and pamphlets, by debating it in assemblies, conventions, committees of safety and inspection, in town and county meetings, as well as in private conversations, so that the whole people in every colony of the 13 have now adopted it as their own act. This will cement the Union and avoid those heats and perhaps convulsions which might have been occasioned by such a declaration 6 months ago. But the day is past. The 2nd day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forevermore. You will think me transported with enthusiasm, but I am not. I am well aware of the toil and blood and treasure that it will cost us to maintain this declaration and support and defend these states. Yet, through all the gloom, I can see the rays of ravishing light and glory. I can see that the end is more than worth all the means, and posterity will triumph in that day's transaction, even although we should rue it, which in trust, a God I trust, we will not. Now, as I said before, he believed that July 2nd should have been the actual Independence Day. Why? Because it was on July 2nd, 1776, that the delegates of the Second Continental Congress meeting in Philadelphia officially separated the 13 colonies from Britain by approving a motion for independence advanced by Richard Henry Lee of Virginia. 12 of the 13 colonies approved it. New York abstained, as its representatives did not have permission to vote for it at that time. Later that day, the Pennsylvania Evening Post published this. This day, the Continental Congress declared the United Colonies free and independent states. That's when the actual Declaration of Independence, whose principal author was Thomas Jefferson, was adopted, although not signed by the members of the Continental Congress. Now, he was one of the Committee of Five who had written the Declaration, the other four being John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman. Now, it wasn't until July 8th that the city of Philadelphia, where the Declaration was signed, held a parade and a firing of guns to mark the moment. And it wasn't until July 9th, the Continental Army, which was under the leadership of General George Washington, got the news from Washington himself. Washington ordered soldiers who were in New York City to defend it from the British to gather in Lower Manhattan that evening, and he read from a July 6th letter he had received from John Hancock, the President of the Continental Congress. A copy of the Declaration was included, and he read it. As for the British government in London, well, they didn't know the United States had declared its independence until August. Now, it is said that here in Bennington, a prominent local tavern keeper, Stephen Fay, on the occasion of hearing of the Declaration of Independence, read it aloud to an assembled group such as you are here. So I will give the podium to our Stephen Fay so that he may recreate that tradition of reading the Declaration aloud to a group of people. Thank you so much. You're very welcome.
I have just received this from the printer Mary Catherine Goddard, Maryland Journal. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably to the same object, evinces a design to reduce them to absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let the facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers incapable of annihilation have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasions from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of the legislatures. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes upon us without our consent, for depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They, too, have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. That other acts and as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all the other things and acts which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming and hearing that stirring rendition of our declaration, and hope you have a wonderful rest of the 4th of July. Thank you.
We do.
And welcome on this sunny, blue sky, 4th of July. A terrific day for Independence Day. We are early, so what we are going to do is have Phyllis Chapman answer any questions you might have relative to some historical aspects of the Declaration of Bennington and the Revolutionary War times. And then we will have a few songs, and then we will begin our program, our formal program, that is. So with that, let me turn the podium over to Phyllis, and thank you.
Thank you. I have a question. Phyllis wears a pocket that's on the outside of her skirt, and it's fastened on the outside, and I want to know what somebody in her period, what a woman in her period would have put in that pocket. There are those who could see that as a loaded question. Well, first of all, why a pocket on the outside? Clothing in that era was pretty heavy, and there's a lot of it, but you only had one, maybe two outfits because it took so much fabric. And people do not want to waste money making a skirt and then another skirt with pockets in each of those skirts. It is wasteful of fabric. So we make one pocket and wear it on the outside. Now, what would a lady of my stature need in her pocket at those times? Well, as I said, there's a lot of layers here. So a little fan might be handy. Another very necessary item for a woman of this period, since she spent a great deal of time using one of these things, a needle case. Needles and pins are quite expensive, and you don't just drop them and lose them and say, I'll go get another. So I keep my needles in here. You never know when you're going to need one. And the other things that I have in this pocket, which I probably would not have very many of as a woman of this era, are coins. And coins of this period are not yet all the same, because we didn't really have a national currency entirely at that point. So we had Massachusetts coins, We'd have Connecticut coins, New York coins. We might also have a Spanish thaler or dollar thrown in there. And I happen to have an assortment here. I have a silver thaler or a Spanish coin because we're trading with all kinds of people. So I have a Spanish dollar that looks like this. But if I'm buying something and I'm actually going to use cash and it only costs 50 cents, I'm not going to give them my whole dollar. I will take my dollar and cut it in half for a $half. And suppose it only costs 25 cents, not going to give them a whole $half. I'll take that half and cut it in half again and make a quarter. And I don't know if I'll be able to find it readily, but suppose something is even less than 25 cents. Would they take that little piece and cut it again? Yes? You could cut it a quarter in half and you would have what they called a bit. A bit is worth 12.5 cents. And if you've heard the old song, shave and a haircut, 2 bits, that's a quarter for a shave and a haircut. Thanks.
As you can see, with all our cell phones and digital watches and everything, we still got our timetables a little mixed up today. How did, back in that period, how did you keep accurate time for scheduling meetings and whatnot?
Another interesting question. And it will depend upon where you live and what you do, whether it matters to you at all. If you are farming people, farming families living in the country, you probably can't afford a clock. No doubt you would not have a watch either, but you don't care because people in the country in our era live by the sun, and you know when it's time to get up, when it's time to eat, when it's time to do these chores, middle of the day, and you don't have a lot of lighting at night because although you see candles all over the place in movies, they were actually quite expensive to have. So most people went to bed when the sun did. You had an early to bed, early to rise mantra then. Clocks were much more a feature in towns and cities. And there was always, of course, a town clock, perhaps, in prominent view. But you also had your town criers going about the village and would let people know when it was noon, perhaps, or when it's such and such a time and all's well. You've seen that. So time was less of an issue to people back then, and I very highly suspect that they would care whether it was 10:15 or 10:30. It wouldn't matter that much because they weren't caught up in the digital age like we are now.
Any other questions? Okay. Let us, Shep Jones will be leading us, and we thank you very much, Phyllis. We appreciate that. Shep will be in a position to lead us in some songs of the period, shall we say, and those that are very appropriate on this patriotic day. And so, following that, we will look to begin our formal program. So, Shep, the floor is yours.
I ask you to join me in song. First, we'll start out with an old favorite, America the Beautiful. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for patriotry that sees beyond the year, thine alabaster city, undimmed by human tears. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. Our fathers, God, to thee, author of liberty, to thee we sing. Long may our land be bright with freedom's holy light. Protect us by thy might, great God our King. Now I'd like to sing the Vermont song, These Green Mountains. These green hills and silver waters are my home. They belong to me and to all her sons and daughters. May they be strong and forever free. Let us seek to protect her beauty and look with pride on the golden dome. They say home is where the heart is. These green mountains are my home. These green mountains are my home.
Thank you very much, Shep. We appreciate your singing and enjoyment. If we could have, before we start our program here, if we could have those who are ringing the bells line up. Jerry, you want to, we need Mike Nigro, Randall Barkley, Nancy Cozio, Mary Lou Albert, Susan Katz,
Yep, she's talking to you.
Jonas Spivak, Matt Bentley, Dan Roche, Dana Rozicki, John Gagnon, Sarah Perrin, and do we have a Ted Bird here? How about a Vicki Wilson? Carol. Ted Hurd today? North Carolina. Guess we need Jane. Vicky. There you go. While our bell ringers are getting themselves organized, let's begin. Again, welcome. We are so pleased to have all of you here today. I'm Mike Day. I'm the president of the Bennington Rotary Club. We want to thank everyone for joining us for Bennington Rotary's part of the joint ceremony with the Friends of Bennington Monument on this Independence Day. We welcome the participation of the VFW Riders and the American Legion Riders. And we thank CAT TV for live streaming this ceremony. We also welcome the living historians Michael and Phyllis Chapman, who provided a dramatic reading of the Declaration of Independence of the Bennington Battle Monument. Thank you so very much for your appearance here in your period costume, and help us relive and sustain the history of Bennington, Vermont, and this country. Bennington Rotary is also pleased to welcome our district governor, Randall Barkley, and his wife Diane to our event today. We're putting Randall to work to ring one of the bells. He's over in that part. There he is. Welcome. It is fitting that we recognize what the Founding Fathers did that July 4th in 1776, when they put their signatures on the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson knew the importance of the document that he wrote, and he encouraged his countrymen to celebrate that day and every July 4th thereafter. Every year for the past 9 years, we have had our own Rotarian, Francis Shep Jones, lead us in song. You've heard him already this afternoon. Let me tell you a little bit about Shep. He has been in choirs most of his adult life. Way back when Shep was in college, he met his wife during church choir practice. He had a 20-year career in the United States Army that took him all around the world. And wherever he was stationed, he always managed to find a choir to join. After settling back in Bennington, he was a member of the Bennington Choral Society, the Second Congregational Church Choir, and the Serenity Singers, which is a group associated with hospice. Please remove your hats as Shep leads us in the singing of our national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched, were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Would now everyone please face the flag and recite the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice. We thank you all for your efforts as citizens of Bennington and elsewhere to make our town a great place to live. Here as I read a concurrent resolution. In 1963, both houses of Congress passed concurrent resolution number 25, which reads, whereas the tolling of the Liberty Bell at Independence Hall, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon of the 4th day of July, 1776, proclaiming the signing of the Declaration of Independence, whereas the adoption of this historic document marked the birth of our country as a free and independent nation, and whereas it is fitting that the anniversary of this great event should be appropriately observed in each year at the same moment throughout the United States, now, therefore, be it resolved that the Congress hereby declares that the anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence should be observed each year by the ringing of bells throughout the United States at the hour of 2 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time in the afternoon of the 4th day of July, or at such other time on that day as may be determined by local authority, and call upon civic and other community leaders to take appropriate steps to encourage public participation in such observance. Once again, we welcome Shep to lead us in the singing of God Bless America.
God Bless America came on the scene at the beginning of World War II and was made famous by K. Smith. What I'm going to sing now is the version that was sung at that time. When the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us all be grateful for a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we raise our voices in a common prayer. God bless America, when that I love stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Now everybody should sing it. God bless America, when that I love night with a light from above, from the mountains to the prairie, to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet
Bells were once the fastest means of communication in any town. Of course, today we have radio, television, and the internet accessible from numerous electronic devices. We are fortunate here in Bennington to have churches and others that still have bells that are in working order. These churches have rung with us every year. The Old First Church, St. Francis Sacred Heart, St. Peter's Episcopal, the First Baptist Church, Green Mountain Christian Center, and St. John the Baptist. U.S. Navy ships also have bells, used for signaling, keeping time, and sounding alarms. Bells are an important part of a ship's routine and readiness. Our bell comes from the USS Bennington, an aircraft carrier that served our nation from 1944 through 1970. Ordered by the Navy just 8 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the USS Bennington was built in Brooklyn by the New York Naval Yard. For 2 years in the Second World War, this bell rang as the ship operated throughout the Pacific Theater. It rang as planes launched from its deck to support soldiers and Marines as they stormed the beaches of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Throughout the Cold War, this bell rang as the USS Bennington patrolled the world's oceans, from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean and back to the Pacific again. In 1964, this bell rang as 20 Marine helicopters were launched from the USS Bennington to provide disaster relief to the people of Northern California, who experienced the worst flood in their history. In 1967, the bell rang as the ship recovered the unmanned Apollo 4 spacecraft after it splashed down in the Pacific Ocean after a successful mission which tested the systems that would soon send men to the moon. The bell fell silent in 1970 as the USS Bennington was placed out of commission with the Pacific Reserve Fleet. Our Rotarians will now ring the bell 13 times. Once for each of the original states. For Pennsylvania, the bell is rung by Mike Nagro. For Pennsylvania, I'm sorry, that was for Delaware. That was for Delaware. For Pennsylvania, District Governor Randall Barclay. For New Jersey, Nancy Cozio. For Georgia, Mary Lou Albert. For Connecticut, Susan Katz. For Massachusetts, Jonah Spivak. For Maryland, Matthew Bentley. For South Carolina, Dan Roche. For New Hampshire, Dana Rozicki. For Virginia, John Gagnon. For New York, Sarah Perrin. For North Carolina, Ted Berg. And the 13th bell for Rhode Island by Dean Hanson. As I'm sure many of you know, Vermont is the 14th state in the Union. The state of Vermont was born right here in Bennington. So it is only fitting that we ring our bells one more time for Vermont. To ring the bell for the 14th time and for Vermont, our club always picks a group or individual that is outstanding in our community. Past recipients chosen as the 14th bell ringer include Old Castle Theater, Miss Teen Vermont Pageant, the Bennington Rescue Squad, Mount Anthony Interact Club, the Vermont National Guard, the North Bennington Village School, the MAU Chamber Singers, and Patricia Johnson, registered nurse at Southern Vermont Medical Center. This year, we are proud to have with us to ring the bell for Vermont, Don Miller, representing the Bennington Historical Society. The Bennington Historical Society at Bennington Museum recovers and preserves information about the history of the Bennington region and shares this information with the community through projects, publications, programs, and other activities. The Society is a volunteer-operated program of Bennington Museum and serves to support the museum's mission by fostering a greater understanding of our common heritage. The Bennington Historical Society's work in the last few years have included research for the Voices from the Grave dramatization, playing an integral part in the commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the Breckenridge Standoff, and updating the Old Bennington Walking Tour brochure, which is now in its second printing. In the coming years, the Bennington Historical Society anticipates playing a meaningful part in the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Bennington and continuing its popular lecture series. And now our outgoing president, Dana Rozicki, has a small token of our esteem for the work which you do. Don Miller, would you please join us here at the podium?
Congratulations. Thank you. Bennington Rotary Club hereby declares that the 14th bell ringer, the 9th annual ceremony, is the Bennington Historical Society for fostering a greater understanding of our common heritage. Today, July 4th, 2022.
Thank you, Bennington Rotary. Thank you, Dana. On behalf of the Bennington Historical Society and Joe Hall, our dean, who could not be here today, we are honored to ring this bell the 14th time today. With this 14th ring, we recognize the joining of Vermont to the Union on March 4, 1791. Vermont was an independent republic for 14 years before becoming the 14th state. Freedom and unity, that is our Vermont motto. Today, we continue to work to perfect both freedom and unity. So with this 14th ring, let freedom ring again and forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. And thank you to the Bennington Historical Society for being our 14th ringer this year. With that, our formal program is concluded. Everyone who now wishes to ring the bell is welcome. Please join the line. And we thank you all for coming. Happy 4th of July to everyone.
Very good. Very good.
Yay!